miracle of the widow's son being revived when everyone thought he was dead. Some time passes from the time the famine started, 3 years. Some say 3.5 years. From the time that Elijah had said no more rain until he gave the word. Now we note that the words from the famine or since the famine were not in the original, but have been added in various versions for clarity. And God told Elijah to go and appear before Ahab the king. And the NET says that God said that that needed to happen so that he, God, would send rain. Now this to me implies God had a lesson to teach Ahab and others first. Keep in mind also that the famine, due to lack of rain, was very severe in the area of Samaria. Hi, I'm Ken Godevanis, and this is Digging for Scriptural Gems. Thank you for joining us again today as we delve into 1 Kings chapter 18. And today, in 1 Kings chapter 18, we're looking at the first 19 verses, verses 1 to 19. Our text says, Ahab called Obadiah, who was over his household, and happened to be someone who greatly feared the Lord. Earlier, when Jezebel destroyed the prophets of the Lord, Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them in 2 groups of 50 each in 2 separate caves. And there he gave them provisions, food and water. Now Patterson and Austell, commentators, say Obadiah would have had little difficulty in finding caves for the sons of the prophets, because over 2,000 caves have been found and counted in the Mount Carmel area alone. Now Ahab sends him to go and look for water everywhere in the land in hope of finding some water for the horses, the mules, and the cattle. And Ahab would do the same thing. In fact, they divided the country up into 2, and each went their way. In his search, Obadiah runs into Elijah. He recognizes him, falls on his face before him, and says, "Is this you, Elijah, my master?" There was clearly an earlier relationship between them because of their faith in God. And Elijah tells him to go and find Ahab and tell him, "Behold, Elijah is here." But Obadiah knew that would not be a welcome message in the ears of Ahab, and he feared for his life. He knew Ahab had searched high and low for Elijah and was angry at those who swore that they could not find him. Obadiah was afraid that God would send Elijah somewhere else after they parted, and if he told Ahab he had found him but then couldn't produce him, Ahab would surely kill Obadiah. He was certain of that, given how Ahab knew that he had protected the prophets of the Lord earlier when Jezebel, Ahab's wife, was trying to kill them. What's interesting here is that Obadiah says, "That's not fair for you to do that, Elijah." Now the exact words are not there in the original text, but added to clarify the logic of Obadiah's argument. The argument being, "I've been a loyal follower of the Lord from my youth." I'm sure there have been times that many of us have said to God, "God, this isn't fair. Lord, it's not fair." But we do know better, don't we? We know, or we should know from our experience, that God's way, based on his thinking and his will, is indeed always better. And what does Elijah do? He simply swears by the living God that he would not go away, that he would not hide again, that he would show himself to Ahab that day. Obadiah, his life would be safe. Now verse 16 tells us that hearing that, Obadiah went to meet Ahab, showing his great faith and his great trust in both God and God's prophet Elijah. So he told Ahab about Elijah's presence, and Ahab, the Bible says, went to meet Elijah. Now when they met, here's what Ahab said. Is that you, you troubler of Israel? A very different response to meeting Elijah than the one Obadiah gave him. Elijah tells Ahab that he hadn't troubled Israel, but rather Ahab and his father's house had done so by forsaking God's commandments and following the Baals. And right there and then, Elijah issues a challenge to Ahab. He says, gather all Israel to Mount Carmel, along with 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah, even Jezebel's friends and companions who eat at her table. We're going to stop there and dig a little deeper into these verses. We can't overlook or underestimate what Obadiah did for the 100 prophets of God at a time when Jezebel was doing all in her power to eliminate them. What he did took a lot of courage that came from a sincere belief in the Almighty. God allows his people to do great things through him in times of need. Cornelia Orlando Johannan, or you may know her as Corrie ten Boom, who lived between April 1892 to April 1983, was a Dutch watchmaker and later a Christian writer and a public speaker who worked alongside with her father Caspar ten Boom, her sister Betsy, and other family members to help many Jewish people escape from the Nazis during the Holocaust in World War II. And how did they do that? By hiding them in their home and her home. Yes, they were caught, and she was arrested, and she was sent to the Ravensbrück concentration camp. Her most famous book, The Hiding Place, also made into a movie, is a biography that recounts the story of her family's efforts and how she found and shared hope in God while she was imprisoned at the concentration camp. There are other examples of such heroism. We just have to look for them. Also interesting is that when Elijah and Ahab met, Ahab immediately blames the man of God for Israel's troubles and thus blames God. Chuck Smith finds it interesting that people live such wicked lives, and then when the fruit of their wickedness comes, they want to then blame God for the calamities in their lives. Do you know anyone like that? Have you ever been like that? Have I ever been like that? We note that God told Elijah, who had been hiding for the duration of the famine, to present himself before Ahab. David Gusev says, there's a time to hide and be alone with God. And there's also a time to present yourself to the world. Some of us prefer or wish to always remain hidden when we should step up and present ourselves. Each of us know when we've missed that instruction from God in our lives. Let us now endeavor to not miss it the next time. The next time he tells us to present ourselves to someone, say, yes, Lord, I will go and meet my Ahab. And note also that when he did meet Ahab, Elijah very calmly, but very boldly, stood up to the false accusations plainly and directly. We all can take a lesson from that as to how we approach those who would oppose us. Gusick also gives us some more thoughts on Obadiah when he writes, quote, this may be the same Obadiah whose prophecy against Edom is recorded among the minor prophets. It is a little difficult to be certain, he says, because there were 13 Obadiahs in the Old Testament. The Hebrew name Obadiah means worshipper of Yahweh or servant of Yahweh. And Obadiah was sent out by King Jehoshaphat of Judah to teach the law in the cities of Judah. You can check that out in 2 Chronicles 17:7. And Obadiah was one of the overseers who helped repair the temple in the days of Josiah, king of Judah. Check that out in 2 Chronicles 34:12. And Obadiah was a priest in the days of Nehemiah. You can find that in Nehemiah chapter 10, verse 5. Finally, Matthew Henry raises the question, how did such an evil man like Ahab live with or work with such a godly man like Obadiah, the latter working for the former in a high capacity? I don't know the answer to that question. Many of us have had similar experiences, working for someone that was not godly at all. Perhaps the more important question is, why did God put these two together for so long? And we now have at least two answers. The first being to save those 100 prophets that Obadiah hid in caves while his boss's wife Jezebel was trying to kill them off. And the second being so that Obadiah could bring Elijah and Ahab together. God works out his master plan, and the mature Christian gratefully lets him do it. What's in store for you? What do you have to do for God when he puts you together with an Ahab? Or that you're working under his oversight? Friends, next time we'll see what Elijah had in mind, or more correctly, what God had planted in his mind, and thus what God had planned for his glory to take place on Mount Carmel at that time. Until then, thank you for joining us. If you like what you see or hear, please indicate so. Like this video where you're watching it. If you haven't done so already, many have, please sign up or subscribe. It's free to our YouTube channel, Digging for Scriptural Gems. But most importantly, I wish that you too could study the Bible as much as possible.